Hi, this is Terri Mead. I'm the author of Piloting Your Life, which debuted on September 1st, 2019. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the writing and research process, which was a 9-month process for me from the time that I decided to get started on the research to the time that I self-published the ebook, the paperback, and the audiobook. And no, I did not do this alone, but I did self-publish. I quickly realized after listening to a podcast with my writing coach, editor, and book producer, Katie Cross, that I had no idea what I was doing. And so I hired her to help me with the entire process. But today I'm just going to talk about the research and the writing. When we got started, we put together a contract which outlined the deliverables, the timeline, and the expectations, which was incredibly important for me as a project manager and as a goal-oriented person, but also I think as a writer, because I was able to set the timeline and be able to make sure that I could hit each of them in order to make sure that we hit the September 1st publishing date. And people asked me about that date, was there something special about it? And it was just a matter of, I knew that if I didn't hit that date, that it would just continue to slip, and I didn't want it to just continue to keep going on and on and on. I needed to get back to my regularly scheduled life, which wasn't being a writer. Since then, I've added writing to my repertoire of things, but it's not the only thing that I do. And that was another thing that was really important, is in setting this timeline with these specific deliverables, I made sure that I set writing as a priority every single day. And sometimes I wrote for several hours, and sometimes I wrote for just a little bit. And I did take breaks in between each of the drafts when I provided them to my editor, which was incredibly important, and I highly recommend stepping away from your work at different points. But I made it so that every day I was doing a little bit, even if I didn't feel like it. A lot of times imposter syndrome popped in, and Katie was really helpful in helping to talk me off the ledge through each of the different phases to make sure that I stayed optimistic and committed to the overall project and to the timeline. So I spent December of 2018 and January of 2019 doing my research. We set up a Google shared folder, and in there we put in various different subfolders. And when I did my research, I made sure that all of my notes were taken and they were in there. And that way Katie could see them, I could see them, and I knew that I wouldn't lose my work, because I understand there are significant redundancies within Google to make sure that we don't lose our data. So the research went in there. When I did interviews with women, I recorded those interviews using Uber Conference, and I also took notes so that I was able to refer back to them as I was actually doing the writing. And I printed everything out, put everything in a binder, and it just made it much easier. Same thing when I read books. I would go through and read books, and I read between 35 and 40 books. And I would highlight things, and I would make notes, and then I would go in and create individual documents and take notes within those and have those out there on the shared drive as well. I put when I read them. I also put in all of the information around the book, which made it much easier later on when I was doing references for my book. I found that because I was so organized at the front end, some of the tedious stuff at the back end was a lot easier. And then when I listened to podcasts, I did the same thing. And then also when I did articles, when I found articles online, what I would do was copy and paste those into a Google Doc, put down the date it was published, and then also put down the date that I read it. I would also put in the link so that I could use that for references as well. And it was so incredibly helpful that I was that organized at the very beginning, because it really helped with the references. And it also, when I needed to dig into something further, I could easily go back to it. And having it in the shared drive meant I didn't have to look all over for it. And Katie's team actually put the references together and the footnotes, and so they were able to easily pull that, and that was incredibly helpful. And then once I finished the research after the 2 months, I started with the first draft, and Katie and I worked together to create the initial outline of what we thought the chapters were going to be. And then I put in some basic content around that. The goal for that particular section was about 10,000 words, and I, as a recovering type A overachiever, actually wrote about 30,000 words. And in writing those 30,000 words, it was, she kept saying that more is better. And that was really helpful for the next draft, which was really a much bigger draft that was the big brain dump. It was really helpful to have a lot because in that next draft, I went from 30,000 words to 84,000 words. The goal for the book was actually about 65,000 words, which is where it ended up, and it's about 250 pages long. My book is nonfiction, and so it may be a little bit different if you're doing fiction or something that is even more deeply researched than my book was. So after I finished the first draft, I provided it to Katie, who, acting as my editor, she went through and asked a bunch of questions, moved some stuff around, made some suggestions on what I needed to do for the second draft. And as I said a little bit earlier, having some space or distance from your work, even if it's just for a couple of days, is really helpful, or at least it was for me, because at the end of the process, I didn't hate my book. I was a little sick of it, but then again, I had to read the audiobook twice. But I didn't hate it. I ended up being really proud of it. But if I hadn't had that space, I think it would have been harder to do each subsequent draft and then be ready to really, finalize it. The other thing that I found is the work that I do to basically fund my family is around IT and technology related stuff. And I found that there were days that I had a really hard time. I couldn't do it, have myself in the headspace of writing and content creation at the same time that I was trying to do my technical work. So the weeks that I knew I had to do more work that was IT related, I really had to, give my self space and separation. I had to do a little extra yoga and a little extra meditation in order to allow for that, because my brain just could not do both of those in the same day very easily. So as I worked on the next draft, let's see, we've talked about draft 1, we've talked about draft 2, which went to 84,000 words. And then to draft 3, which then was more of refinement, and I got to about 74,000 words. One of the things that I forgot to mention is initially what we did is we created the outline, and then I expanded that out to about 30,000 words. And then what Katie did was she broke each of the chapters down into individual documents. And then what I would do is, and then for each draft, she would save off the old and then work from the new, add in all the comments. And then I would work from that in going through and continuing to do the writing process. So then we would retain the previous version, so that if it was like, wait, I thought I already wrote about this, or didn't we already address this point, I could refer back to previous ones. So staying really organized and having really good hygiene around the documents ended up being incredibly helpful as we went through it, because there were times that I had to go back and take a look, because Katie might have moved something and I'm like, I don't like that, I want to move this back around, or she'd cut out whole sections, and then I'd go, wait, I'd wrote about this and I wanted to pull that back in. So the process for each draft ended up being the same, which is I would deliver it to her either on the due date or a little bit before, and then she'd have it, and then I'd step away and go do something else for a little bit just to clear my brain. And then it would come back to me, I'd go through it, I'd do as much as I could on my own, and then there were times that we would talk about things. I actually wrote a blog post about this that's out on Medium, so if you want to go take a look at it, it's under Terri Hansen Mead, and I'm doing a series of blog posts about the writing experience, because I do get asked about this a lot. The important thing to remember is this was my experience, and everybody's is going to be a little bit different depending on what the project is and what the time constraints were. One of the other things that I did that was incredibly helpful is I created a tracker. I needed to feel like I had progress, because this was really a big project. And so for each particular draft, I broke it down by chapter, and then I had these in-betweener sections. And I was able to keep track of when I drafted it, the number of words, and then when I'd go to the next draft, I would, make note of when I cleared the points on it, and then I'd expand on it. And I highlighted everything in green as I completed each of the sections. And then I felt like I was accomplishing something. It's kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This was my way of attacking an elephant of a project to me. So then I get to the final draft, and I identified some beta readers and I sent it off to them with some specific questions that I wanted answered. And I was looking really for trends. I wasn't looking for specific editing comments or some nitpicky type stuff. I was looking for grammar check. I wasn't looking for punctuation. I was looking for some broader trends, and I got some really great feedback, at which point I went ahead and incorporated that into what was going to be the final draft that was going to go off to the proofreaders. Katie had a team with a couple of proofreaders, and then I proofread it probably like 7 times. And then I also gave it to a number of people, actually like 1 or 2 or 3 people that I knew would take a close look at it and give me some good feedback. And once I got it back from the proofreaders, it was at that point that it was done and we were able to move into the production phase. I've talked about a couple of tips coming, throughout this in terms of being organized, setting up a schedule and then sticking to it, making sure that writing is a priority if this is something that you're really committed to, giving yourself some space in between each of the drafts. The other thing is, one of the things I tried to do, which I'm terrible at, was really try to celebrate each of the milestones. It went quick with a 9-month process, but it really was a lot of work. And it was hard. And there were times that I really did feel like an imposter, and I questioned why I was doing this, why it was important to get my voice out. And with that, it was really helpful to have Katie on my team. So having accountability partners, having a coach, having someone who can help talk you off the ledge at the times when you're just feeling less than confident can be incredibly helpful and can really help move the process forward so you don't get stuck on yourself. Because this is something that, for me, given that this was my first book and I really never saw myself as a writer, this was a big deal. And I was sharing my stories, I was sharing the stories of other women, and I was also sharing a lot of research, trying to create an inspiring, well-researched beach read. A little bit of it was a tall order, and fortunately I was able to deliver, and I'm super proud of what I created. Which leaves me to the very last thing, which is really be kind to yourself and take good care of yourself through the process. It's hard. And if you are exercising, if you have meditation or yoga to help clear your brain, eating healthy, I probably should have been doing a little bit more of the healthy eating. I probably drank a little too much, but that ended up helping. Also, I might have drank champagne to celebrate some of the wins on a regular basis. But I would not change this process for the world. I'm noodling over what the idea is for my next book, and I will definitely be working with Katie on the next one. I might choose different resources for the book production, but that's for another video. So if you're in the process, good luck, stay with it, and just stay organized and make sure you have the right team around you to support you.